What if I told you that the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love has been psychologically frozen in time for 20 years? Elizabeth Gilbert's new memoir, All the Way to the River, isn't just a story about addiction and loss. It is a real time documentation of what developmental psychologists call consciousness arrest. When someone gets stuck at a specific stage of psychological development and cannot move beyond it. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. There is a psychological model called spiral dynamics that reads human consciousness like a map. It shows us that we don't just learn and grow, we evolve through completely different stages of psychological complexity. Each stage is like an operating system for how we make sense of reality itself. The green stage, what researchers call the sensitive self, is where consciousness develops extraordinary empathy, emotional intelligence, and the ability to think in systems about relationships. It is beautiful. Green creates therapists who can hold space for trauma, activists who fight for justice, people capable of profound intimacy and authentic connection. But here is what is fascinating: every stage has a shadow side. And when someone gets arrested in green stage, when they cannot integrate the strategic thinking of earlier stages or the wisdom of later ones, something strange happens. Their greatest strengths become their greatest limitations. Gilbert's memoir reads like a textbook case of green arrest in action. She documents patterns that reveal consciousness frozen at this stage for decades. Listen to how she describes her relationship with dying partner Raya Elias, two addicts on a collision course toward catastrophe. But notice what is missing: any strategic thinking about how to prevent that catastrophe. The memoir overflows with poems, drawings, spiritual mantras created during crisis. She calls this psychic nakedness, complete emotional transparency as a way of processing experience. But there's something revealing here. She is simultaneously living through trauma and turning it into art. The creation of emotional artifacts becomes as important as the healing itself. This is Green's signature move, aestheticizing emotional experience rather than strategically managing it. Then comes the most telling moment. Gilbert documents contemplating harming Raya and frames this as brave honesty about codependent despair. From a developmental perspective, this reveals how Green arrests mistakes emotional intensity for spiritual authenticity. What Gilbert documents is textbook codependency, but viewed through the lens of developmental arrest, it becomes even more fascinating. She describes complete psychological merger with Raya's experience. Raya's pain becomes a pain. Raya's crisis becomes her identity. Where does Gilbert end and Raya begin? She really cannot tell. Object relations theorists call this major fantasy, the unconscious belief that true intimacy requires dissolving all boundaries. But here is what makes this a green arrest pattern. Gilbert has all the emotional sophistication to feel this deeply, to process it artistically, to express it authentically. What she lacks is the strategic awareness to ask basic questions. Is this sustainable? Is this actually helping? What are the long term consequences? Green consciousness without higher stage integration becomes what we might call emotional fundamentalism, where feelings become the only guide to truth and action. So, what would healthy development beyond green actually look like? Spiral dynamics calls it yellow consciousness, the ability to think systematically, to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to integrate emotional wisdom with strategic thinking. Yellow integration would recognize that sustainable caregiving requires maintaining your own well being, that boundaries don't diminish love, they make it possible, that the most caring response is not always the most emotionally satisfying one. The memoir also lacks what they call orange stage strategic thinking. Orange would ask practical questions. What professional support exists? How do we prevent caregiver burnout? What is the difference between supporting healing versus enabling dysfunction? Instead, Gilbert remains trapped in Green's processing mode, feeling everything deeply, expressing everything authentically, but without the practical wisdom to transform feelings into sustainable action. But here is what is most striking from a developmental perspective. Gilbert hasn't grown since Eat, Pray, Love, or so it seems. Same patterns, same emotional intensity, same spiritual seeking, same relational focus. 20 years later, she's cycling through identical psychological territory. This is textbook developmental arrest. In early developments, crisis catalyzes growth into more complex consciousness. But Gilbert's memoirs show someone having intense experiences without integrating them into wisdom. She's become what we might call a transformation theorist, always processing, never actually transforming. And here is the kicker, the content has to get more dramatic over time. Why? Because arrested green consciousness needs increasing intensity to generate the same sense of meaning and aliveness. Food, travel, and meditation aren't enough anymore. Now she needs dying partners and life or death emotional crisis. But Gilbert's arrest doesn't happen in isolation. She is both product and producer of what we might call our green dominant cultural moments. Look around. We celebrate emotional expression, vulnerability, authentic sharing of trauma. Social media rewards people for documenting their most intimate struggles. These are not inherently bad developments. Emotional literacy represents genuine human progress. But when an entire culture gets arrested in green consciousness, we start making dangerous mistakes. We confuse intensity with growth, processing with healing, documentation with transformation. Gilbert's audience has been loyal for 20 years partly because they are developmentally arrested alongside her. She gives them permission to stay in green consciousness, to prioritize feeling over thinking, to celebrate boundary dissolution as spiritual advancement. It is a beautiful trap that keeps everyone psychologically frozen. So, what would yellow integration of Gilbert's situation actually look like in practice? Picture this. Instead of complete merger, professional support networks that distribute the caregiving load. Instead of unlimited empathy, clear boundaries around enabling behaviors. Instead of financial enmeshment, limits that protect both parties from codependent dynamics. Instead of processing everything through art and emotion, therapeutic frameworks that help each person maintain individual integrity while navigating crisis together. Yellow consciousness understands something important. Love and boundaries are not opposites. Boundaries make love sustainable. It recognizes that the most compassionate response is not always the most emotionally gratifying one. Most importantly, yellow grounds green's beautiful insights in practical reality. Instead of floating in cloud consciousness, always seeking transcendence through emotional intensity, it plants feet on earth and does the unglamorous work of sustainable care. Through this lens, Gilbert's memoir becomes something fascinating, a perfect specimen of green arrest in its natural habitat. It shows us both the extraordinary beauty of green consciousness, the capacity for deep feeling, authentic expression, genuine care, and its profound limitations when disconnected from strategic thinking and systematic wisdom. This invitation here is not judgment. Green arrest is a normal part of human development that millions of people navigate. The goal is not abandoning Green's insights. Emotional intelligence represents genuine evolutionary progress. The goal is integration, moving from intensity to wisdom, from processing to transformation, from documentation to actual development. Gilbert's memoir offers us a choice about our own development. We can remain tourists in the landscape of transformation, always having experiences, always processing them, never actually growing. Or we can do the harder work of integration, learning to honor our emotional wisdom while developing the strategic and systematic thinking that makes that wisdom sustainable in the real world. The real spiritual work isn't the performance of growth, it is the practice of